hello or a good morning or anything else you'd like to say. That way we'll know we hear one another. Alan Burrow.
I'm here. Good morning.
Good. Christy Hovenitz. Christy, could you hear us okay? I did not hear Christy. Maybe she's get her audio sorted out. Cody Shoemaker.
Sorry.
Morning,
Can you hear me now, Chris?
Oh, I did hear you, Christy. Hey, good morning. And I heard you as well, Cody. Hi. Okay, Deborah Donovan.
Good morning.
Hey there, Deborah. Demario Brown.
Good morning. I'm here.
Great. Eddie Passant.
Good morning. I'm here.
Good morning, Dr. Passant. Elaine Brewer.
Good morning.
Good morning. Heather Morrison.
Good morning.
And Kelly Brown.
Good morning.
Kristen Fondren. Is Kristen Fondren with us?
Good morning. I'm here.
Hi there, Kristen. Lance Evans. Lance Evans hear us okay? Latoya Minor.
Good morning.
Hi there, Latoya. Lee Pambianchi.
Good morning.
Good morning, Lee. Margie Pulley. Margie Pulley, are you with us this morning?
Good morning.
Oh, hey there, Margie. Marion Jones. Marion Jones.
Good morning,
there's
Marion.
Marion. There you are. Great. Welcome. Makisha Davis.
Good morning, this is Ms. Davis.
Okay, sorry if I messed up your name there. Good morning. I see somebody listed as MMA guest. I don't know who that is. Anybody who's logged in as MMA? Let's go on. Nathan Oakley.
Morning, Chris.
Hey there, Nathan. Nicole Minotti.
Good morning.
Hey there, Nicole. I see a login that says OTSS Skype. Don't know who's connected to that account.
Yeah, you can just skip over that one.
Okay.
That's technology.
Thanks. Richard Balico. Richard Balico, can you hear us okay? Let's go on to Robin Ballard.
Good morning. I'm here.
Hey there, Robin. Ryan Kirkendall.
I'm here. Good morning.
Hey, Ryan. Charlotte Seals.
I'm here. Good morning.
Good morning. Let's see. Oh, here we go. Vicky Tiblier.
Good morning.
Hey there, Vicky. Wendy Faulkner.
Good morning.
Hi, Wendy. And I see a number. Could be somebody who's got a separate call-in for phone versus.
Yeah, it's Christy. That's me. I had to call in. My microphone doesn't work on my computer.
No worries. Anybody else who's joined us since I started going down the list, or maybe who I called, but.
This is Lance Evans. I'm sorry. I couldn't unmute myself when you asked. Sorry about that.
I understand completely. Hey there, Lance. Any others that didn't get a chance to say hello yet?
Richard Balico also just chatted in, Chris.
Great, thanks, Nathan, and welcome, Richard. Sorry that the mute is glitchy. Hopefully that gets sorted out. Anybody else who we didn't hear from quite yet? All right, well, let us go ahead and get started. Cody, I think you've got the controls, if you wouldn't mind to display the presentation. I think there's some front slides we can zip through pretty quickly, and maybe we could just get to the agenda. Perfect. And Yeah, we're scheduled today to go from 9 to 11:30. I don't know if we'll need all that time, but it's always good to have the time budgeted in case we do. And there's two main topics. After we hear updates from the department, and I'll also say just a word or two about the meeting notes from our last meeting, then we're going to give you a check-in, I think is the best way to describe it, regarding our WorkKeys conversation. We've had a chance to do some data analysis since we last talked in late August, and we wanted to share that with you and just affirm our understandings about how we're moving forward with that. So we've budgeted a little less than an hour for that conversation. We'll take a break. We think we'll hit that break at about 10 o'clock, and then we're going to spend the rest of the time just really walking through the accountability indicators and thinking together about the kinds of considerations that we need to apply as we sort through decisions about what accountability might look like in the 2021 year. We know there's just a ton of tough decisions ahead, and we're starting that journey. I think what I'll do now is just say a note about the meeting summary from August. I don't know, Alan or Cody, can you let me know if it did that go out to the committee? All right, Alan and Cody, can you guys hear me okay?
Oh, I'm sorry, I was muted. Yeah, I was attached to the Teams meeting. Do you want us to pull that up?
No, I don't. Thanks. I just wanted to affirm that folks got them, and yeah, they're pretty straightforward, colleagues. And as we normally do, I'll certainly, if you, I know that folks got them shortly before the meeting, so if you need a little more time to read them, and if you want to send via email any comments, we're always happy to receive that. You'll see there were two main things we talked about in August. We spent most of our time talking about the WorkKeys and its inclusion and accountability. I really think the two main recommendations came from that. It was an important meeting, and I think we solidified two main recommendations. One had to do with the timing for, so we affirmed the inclusion in college readiness as a WorkKeys or ACT for a qualifying WorkKeys score. But I heard from the task force that 2021 should be a pilot year. During that time, we'd collect information, we'd do some analyses to inform what an appropriate cut score would be, or a level of qualifying performance on WorkKeys that stands in as comparably rigorous to ACT, which, by the way, we again have some more to tell you about that today. And then we also heard from the task force that full implementation shouldn't proceed until funding's available to allow all districts to administer WorkKeys. So I think folks said green light to move on with the framework as has been established, but want to do that additional research following a pilot year and make sure that there's equitable access to WorkKeys before it's, through my phrasing, ready for prime time, ready for full inclusion in a way that counts in an operational sense. We know that the uncertainties of this year impact that, and I think I heard that from the task force last month saying that let's reserve the right to apply additional scrutiny to this as circumstances might change our thinking about when and how this is piloted. I did note that there was some dissent that at least one task force member had a different view about how WorkKeys might be included, so we made sure to include that in the notes. The rest of the notes has to do with the low 25 growth for high school. That was something that we worked through pretty quickly in our discussions in August. We talked about the problem of having each of those cohorts treated separately when it comes to determining what the threshold for low 25 growth is, and we suggested that pulling all of those prior grades together and applying one cut to this pool of standardized scores would be a superior approach. That was a recommendation that the task force agreed with, and that's where we left that discussion. So let me just pause and see if any members of the committee have feedback on the notes, either as you read them or as you heard me quickly summarize them. Okay, hearing none, I'll just remind folks that we'll keep the window open for another week or so if you have written feedback to give us. and we'll get those firmed up and archived appropriately. And with that, I will turn it over, I believe, to Mr. Burrow to give us an update from the department.
Sure. Okay. Well, most of my updates I know have been communicated. There was some communication sent out after the September board meeting. As you know, usually September would have been the month that we would have put out accountability results for the prior school year, and of course that didn't happen. We do have a new updated report card that is available, and if Deborah wants to add anything to that, she can when I get through. But there was a brief presentation during the board meeting about the new version of the report card and the data that's available. So if you have an opportunity to watch the board meeting, you can do that. As you know, as you may also know, there was a communication sent out regarding a position from the U.S. Department of Education that we will continue with planning for assessments, standardized assessments this year. And how we use that assessment data is kind of a different question. So there's some discussion about decoupling assessment from accountability, and the reason for that being that assessment, the publicity that surrounds assessment really focuses heavily on accountability measures and accountability uses for assessment data, but assessments can be useful for many other things, as you know, including your planning in your local district and goal setting for students, establishing baselines for growth in the new academic year for students. So we're hoping that we can have sufficient assessment data to provide those avenues of resources for schools and districts in the coming school year. Now, that being said, we haven't received any waivers from the federal government regarding accountability and identification for school improvement. So at this point, you probably should expect that assessments will be given as best we can this year, and then data from those assessments will likely be used to identify schools for school improvement. So CSI, TSI, and ATSI in the coming year. As far as how accountability is affected by the pandemic and the lack of assessment data in the previous year, that's what we're going to discuss in this group. There's some other things that are hanging out there that we'll discuss further, but obviously, we haven't completed standard setting for U.S. history, and there's other small impacts that we'll have to address in the coming school year. Deborah, do you have anything you want to add about this report card? Just useful information?
No, just letting everybody know it now includes a search and comparison feature. So if you have a set of schools or districts that you commonly compare with each other, you can do that now in the report card. And as always, any ideas for improvements or additions to the report card are appreciated.
Thank you, Deborah. I think that probably will include let me also add that keep in mind that this is October 27th is the deadline for any necessary changes for the prior academic year. And you may know that that can affect your cohort data. So just if you haven't been looking at those cohort reports in MSIS, be sure you do that, and that someone in your district is doing that. We will run grad rates at the end of the year. Okay, thank you. I'll pass it back to Chris.
All right, thank you, Alan. Yeah, and I'll just one other note. Alan correctly summarizes that many of us are in a wait-and-see place right now when it comes to what flexibilities are going to be permitted by the U.S. Department of Education. They signaled back in June that addenda would be available for school accountability systems, but there wasn't a lot of detail about what that meant, how that differed from the normal process of making changes to accountability. And there was some guidance that was supposed to be forthcoming in the summer of 2020. I know that summer has officially transitioned to fall, and we're still waiting for that guidance. And we'll keep you posted as we learn more about that, because obviously that impacts the way we're thinking about what options are on the table. So we're going to do what we can with the best information we can along the way. And I know Mississippi's in the same place, a lot of states in that regard. Okay, let's move on. I should pause here just to see if there's any comments or questions, and then we'll get right to our first item. Okay, I think we can advance the slides to the first item. You can keep paging forward if you don't mind. Great. Great, we can stop here. So as we've talked about before many times now, this should be sounding familiar to many members of the committee. We began this conversation exploring how career readiness can be more fully represented in the state accountability system. WorkKeys became the instrument that was the focus of the task force to accomplish that. And ultimately, the task force recommended adding WorkKeys as an option to ACT in the college career ready component. And again, I think everybody knows how that works from a technical standpoint, and you see some text here on the slide that clarifies that. That is the ACT or WorkKeys performance based on a benchmark determined to be comparable to ACT, which in fact is what we're going to talk about today. And then I summarized this just a moment ago, so this is repetitive, that maintaining participation in the ACTs was something that this group affirmed, and only moving forward when a census administration can be supported. And then we also tag this as a pilot year. So today we've got some additional data to explore the relationship between the National Career Readiness Certification, or NCRC levels, and ACT performance. And these data are based on state assessment results for the 2018-2019 graduates. So obviously it's not operational for this year, which is something that I know the task force said, having current operational data would be an important piece of this puzzle. But again, we wanted to keep the task force informed with every additional bit of insight we're able to put on this question. And this is actually a fairly substantial turning point in our ability to understand the relationship. So we felt like it was really important to bring it back to the task force. So just to make sure I keep the main thing as we proceed with this conversation, the central question we're looking to address is what is a comparable level of rigor between those WorkKeys, NCRC levels, and the ACT? So let's show you some data. So we start with, so again, we're talking about match data, ACT, NCRC levels with the most recent year available, which was the 18-19 year. And so on the left there, these rows you see are the various NCRC levels, no level, bronze, silver, gold, and platinum. And for each of the ACT content areas, English, reading, and math, you see a mean ACT score. So and the N is just the number of students that were involved in producing that mean. So you can see most students in Mississippi scored at the bronze and silver level, fewer gold, fewer still at the platinum level. And you can just look at those bold figures there and say, for example, if you just go across with the silver row, a mean ACT score for students earning silver is 18. For ACT English, for reading, it's 19.39, and for math, it's 18.39. One benchmark that you might apply to that is how do those differ from the college readiness benchmarks for the ACT? And I believe those are, somebody might help me out here, but I believe it's 18, 22, and 22 for English, reading, and math, respectively. So, but you might be thinking when, thanks, Ryan. You might be thinking when you look at that, well, that's a mean score. That's not really a threshold score, and that's a fair point. So that's why we took it to the next level. So let's get to the next slides. Now, this work gets a little more technical, but I think it's worth rolling up our sleeves and exploring this in all of its technical glory. What we did is we took each of these relationships. So on one hand, think of two columns. In one column, you've got ACT English scores. In another column, you've got the level that the student earned. In this case, bronze, silver, gold, platinum. And then when you look at these levels, these are defined as that level or higher. And what we wanted to do was put a probability on a student getting that level or higher. Now, this is a pretty conventional statistical technique when you have two variables. One is categorical and the other is continuous. The particular method that we use for this is called logistic regression. But we're essentially using the relationship between those categories and those ACT scores to statistically produce a probability that a student can achieve that level based on a given ACT score. So in the graph, what you see is all those dots are various earned ACT scores, which is on the x-axis or the left-right axis. On the y-axis or the the north-south axis, you get a particular probability. Obviously, those are bounded between 0 and 1. And the reason you see a red line right through the middle of this graph is that shows us what a 50% probability is. So that is an important criterion because obviously when that probability is 0.5 or higher, it's more likely than not that a student with that given ACT score would be in that NCRC level. So I know I'm throwing a lot at you there, but I think maybe the best way to understand it is to look at those red numbers that you see associated in the text on the left-hand side. And you see in the first case that, what is an ACT score on English that is associated with 0.5, or you've got your probability is higher than not that you're going to be in the bronze level or higher. And in this case, it falls between an 8 and a 9. And you can kind of, I'm sorry about that. That's a ill-timed phone call. You can see from the graph there, just exactly what I mean when I say it falls between them, because you can see those blue dots, which represents the bronze level. And you can see that the red line is right between a score of 8 or 9. So 8's not quite good enough. 9 is a little higher than necessary to get to 0.5. So another way to say that is if we have an ACT score for a student, when do we become confident that that student could also get a bronze level on WorkKeys? And the answer to that is about at an 8 or 9. And you can kind of go up from there and do the same for silver, gold, and platinum. So for silver, you see it falls right there at 17. So you can say if I have a student who scores a 17 on the ACT, then they've got a 0.5 probability or higher. So this is kind of what we're getting at with that threshold score, which is just the minimum threshold in order to be classified in that level. Gold falls between 23 and 24, and platinum is up there at 29, 30. So platinum is certainly a rigorous level. So let me pause here because I know I put a lot of information out there about this analysis, and I want to make sure I didn't lose anybody. Okay, so I'll keep going. There's 2 more of these, and then we can step back and discuss together what we think the implications of this research is. For reading, I think you're going to see these numbers across the content areas look fairly similar. Probably if you're like me, you start to look at the relationship between those ACT scores that are associated with the probability of earning a level and the difference between those and the college readiness thresholds. So for reading, for English, which we just looked at, that's pretty close for silver. Not so much when you get to reading. When you get to reading, an ACT score of 18 gives you a probability of being in silver of 0.5 or higher, but it's got to be at the 24, 25 level in order to have some confidence that a student's at even a threshold for getting gold. So obviously that's a little higher than the 22, 18 is lower than the 22. So I know that doesn't give us a single level as a clear answer, but I think it does give us some insight about the region in which this cut is likely resides. And you see it's very high for platinum. And then the last graph. So now we're moving on to mathematics. It's a similar pattern. For silver, we're looking at a score of about 17, 18. For gold, that cut falls between a 22 and 23. So there, the gold threshold is actually quite close to the ACT college readiness threshold. So this is one area where I'd look at that and say, it looks like gold is an attractive choice as a criterion for WorkKeys, one that matches in rigor with the ACT. And then we'll just go to the last slide where I think I've just tried to tie it all together. We'd love your reactions to this. What do you think these data suggest about a level of performance on WorkKeys that reflects an appropriately rigorous expectation? We can go back through these data to whatever level that you'd like to support that conversation. What additional analysis or information? My hypothesis is that the committee will say, and I think it's a very fair answer, that this is interesting, but you'd like to see these results when we can produce a census administration, and can we make it even more current and widespread than these data are? And my hope would be that we could do that as well. So I'm not necessarily asking the task force to lock in a recommendation this morning, but I won't keep you from doing that if that's what the pleasure of the task force is. But I'd just love to hear any comments or any reactions about what these analyses suggest about an appropriate level of rigor for WorkKeys should we move forward in including this in the accountability system.
So Chris, I just have a couple questions about the data. Is this Mississippi only data? How many students are included in it, and how generalizable is this to the entire state?
I can definitely answer the first two questions. Yes, it's Mississippi data. On the N size, Cody, would you go back to that first table that had the means, because we have ends on that table. So yeah, so you have to do a little bit of arithmetic, but you can see that you see the N sizes in each NCRC level across those rows. So in terms of how representative this is of the state of Mississippi, maybe one of my colleagues at the department can answer that. And that becomes a question: how representative are those districts that we have WorkKeys data from in 1819 compared to the full state in 1819?
Yeah, I think that's a good point, because we don't have, I would not say we have an equal distribution of WorkKeys participation across the state. So these numbers are certainly coming from areas where WorkKeys is useful in the local community and is given in schools and districts. It is representative of the seniors that graduated in spring of 2019. We chose that year because of the disruption that followed. And so we're looking at if those students took WorkKeys up until July 31st of 2019, and then tying that back to ACT scores that were reported by districts in MSIS. Because as you may recall, we start with the state administration of the ACT, and we allow districts to enter additional administrations in MSIS if they have higher scores from a different administration.
And Alan, can you remind me how many kids are in a cohort typically? Because we're looking at about 4,500 kids in this sample.
I can't off the top of my head. Deborah, can you? I can look it up though.
Yep, so it's about About 30,000 per grade is what we average. So if you're looking at like an 11th grade administration, that would be your starting point, and would probably be somewhat adjusted down when you look at how many students ended up in the senior snapshot calculation.
Yes, we're talking about less than 20% of the students.
About 15, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate the question, Christy. It's such an important question. In fact, I made a note about it in the category of future analyses. And it shouldn't be difficult to do. We should just quickly look at a covariate for those students. I guess we can kind of do that here if anybody knows what the state means are for these various ACT categories. Well, I don't have an overall mean, so that's not so helpful, I guess. But yeah, it's easy to do if we can just compare what this group's doing compared to the state.
Right, and even some descriptive statistics, like who's
Yeah.
in this group, what are their NC or state test scores, demographics, where are they located, is it regional, just to make sure that we're representing statewide population.
Chris, this is Nikki Minotti. I have 2 questions, please.
Sure.
Can someone remind me, because I've gone brain dead, I'm thinking about hurricanes down here on the coast. What is the cut score that makes you college and career ready at each level? I think you said it, but I missed it.
I believe it is 18 in English and 22 for reading and math.
Okay. All right. Also, go ahead. I also was wondering, is there not a way to do the pilot year? Because here, when we gave work key, the only time we've given work keys, we were asked to do so by a private group. We picked kids that would do well on the work keys and gave it. So I don't know how accurate this data is, because the target group that I would think that we're trying to improve are not the kids who are college and career ready. So I guess I'm wondering, could we not do the pilot year and then look at scores to see how to set a cut?
I think your point is very well taken. And I think that connects to Christy's point very nicely, which is hard for us to draw inferences from this until we know the extent to which this looks like the state.
Hey, this is Robin. Can I jump in for a quick second?
Please do. Yes, please go ahead.
Can you hear me?
I can, yes.
The academic endorsement has a 17 in English and a 19 for math, and then the distinguished academic endorsement has the 18 and the 22. But just the career and technical endorsement requires a silver on the work keys. I didn't know if we needed to, if we're going to make a recommendation, the gold would be more in line with a distinguished academic endorsement, and really is a little more advanced than career ready for like the career and technical endorsement.
I appreciate you bringing that information. I think one of the reasons why the college. Oh, sorry, I'm getting an echo. I don't know if others can hear that. Oh, okay, seems to have subsided now. Yeah, I think one of the reasons why the college career ready thresholds become important here is that if this is intended to stand in as equal in rigor to the ACT in the college career readiness component, those are the thresholds that are used for that component, unless I'm mistaken. And so if this is intended to be an alternate signal of a similar level of performance, then I think those thresholds become important. Now, if the task force says that that's not our target, then we should talk through that.
I agree with Nikki that we need to collect the data this year with the populations that we are targeting and see what it is across the state and then compare that data. I mean, we can't compare apples and oranges. And like Nikki said, some of the people that were tested may have been the students who were making 22 on the ACT. That's not the population that we're looking at.
Mm-hmm. I think that's fair.
Yeah, this is Lance. I agree that we need to pull that information. But I do believe, I'm sorry unless I misunderstood what you said. I thought our intention was to be able to set those scores. Obviously, we want to base it on information that's very accurate. But maybe I misunderstood what you said as far as the intention just a minute ago. I'm sorry.
Yeah, if you're referring to the comment I made about, the objective being a comparable level of rigor to the ACT threshold that's currently used in the model are the college career ready benchmarks. So that's why it's been my understanding that continues to be the standard by which we evaluate comparability.
Could I ask you for a favor? Is there any way you might go through and take 5 seconds on each one of those previous screens after this one, the one where you had I appreciate that.
Oh, you mean just to kind of review what these data show again?
I have to review them. I need to screenshot them right quick so I can compare them personally.
Okay.
Sorry about that. I was on my phone earlier and I couldn't do that.
It's okay. It's a public meeting. Take your time with it.
Okay, go ahead. Okay. I was just looking for my comparison in our school district.
Gotcha.
Just whenever you're ready to go to the next one.
Chris, this is Tim Martin. And I'm not trying to throw other factors in here, but I understand the comparability to the college and career readiness standards, but the group of kids that we're looking at and targeting with this, if they can meet this, if they can meet those college and career ready standards already, they'll do that on the ACT, and there's no need for the work keys. I'm thinking, I want rigor and I want expectations to be kept, but at the same time, if we're going to make these equal, then I almost see like we're defeating the purpose of giving another assessment. We're just going to give another assessment, and the same students are going to meet that benchmark that could beat it on the ACT, and those that can't won't. And so, if CTE endorsements have a slightly lower ACT threshold, then why wouldn't we look at those that are more comparable to a silver level than to look at the gold? That's just my thoughts.
So I think you're making the exact point I've been making throughout, but what I've heard from the task force is that supposedly the work keys measure something different. So if it's measuring something different and it's measuring more career readiness expectations, that's great if that's what it is and how it's being used. But we can't just come in and lower expectations on a college and career readiness indicator. And if we are, that's fine, but then we should call it what it is rather than trying to say this is a college and career readiness indicator and the career readiness is the same expectation as college readiness that we're seeing on work keys. But I agree, the work keys and ACT measure a lot of the same things, and we have to, if we think they measure something different and work keys measures career readiness, we still have to maintain that rigor that we have for readiness, whether it's career or college.
Yeah, I could think of at least three. No, I appreciate, Dr. Martin, Dr. Hogan. I totally get what each of you are saying, and I think it's yeah. So here's my perspective. There's probably three different points of view you can take here, and this becomes really a policy and not a technical issue, which is exactly why it's before this committee. The one is you can say that I think the work keys and the ACT measure the same thing. And I want a comparable level on those two. And I don't think anybody's endorsing that. And if that was a point of view, then I think the point of view would just be give the ACT twice. Because all we're really looking at is measurement error that might fluctuate. It might be the reason for fluctuation in scores. So let's discard that, but just for the sake of completeness. The second is, I think, the point that Christy was unpacking a little bit, which is it's not the same construct. It's a different construct, but it's a construct that some students will have more facility demonstrating their knowledge, skills, and abilities with. But we want the level of rigor to be comparable, and the best way we have to do that is to look at a side-by-side comparison to the career readiness thresholds. That's the hypothesis that I think the committee's been operating on heretofore. And that's why these analyses have been presented. Sort of the third is, and this is where I think Dr. Martin was going, is that comparability is not exactly the gold standard here. That I probably shouldn't use gold because that that mixes with NRC levels, but comparability may not be the thing that's most important. That would be a point of view that simply says these are two different constructs measured in two different ways and have two different standards, and that's okay. Because career readiness is defined differently than college readiness, and so, but to do that, let's just be clear, and I think this is the point you were making, Christy, does release the comparability component here, saying that comparability no longer becomes a prime objective. So I do think that in the past, this task force has thought a little bit about what some of the implications of that are and whether or not that would have unintended negative consequences for student achievement in Mississippi. So I think if that becomes the point of view of the task force, then that's something that we should make sure we give appropriate attention to. Hope I didn't confound things. But yeah, and all that is to say is I'm not suggesting there's a single right answer here, but it just, what the evidence you're looking for obviously differs according to the claim that you think is important to support. It might be. I don't mean to cut off the conversation, but these data were never presented with the expectation that folks were going to make a firm recommendation at this meeting. But I do think we've got some good advice for some steps forward, looking at the representativeness, making sure that's included when we have better, more reflective data based on more recent administrations. And we're probably going to have to come back to the very important points that Dr. Martin and others are raising about what the right standard that we should look for is. I don't know that we're going to be able to solve that today, or even that it'd be prudent to solve that today. Again, it's the pleasure of the committee in terms of what we do. There's a lot of things going on with accountability now, so I think it's okay if we press pause on this at the moment. But again, we thought the task force might appreciate having some of the recent data that came to us.
And Dr. Domaleski, this is Dr. Martin again. Yeah. The reason I was late coming into the meeting, Lieutenant Governor Hosemann was here to look at our CTE additions to the high school, and we had a brief conversation. And even though we want to get this right and we need to take more time, I will tell you that time is limited, because if we don't come up with a recommendation from this task force and from MDE, there's a bill already drafted, and the legislature is going to do this for us, and we're not going to like the results. Schools are not going to like the results, I don't believe, of what the legislature is going to produce. So there is a time crunch with this for sure.
Thanks, Dr. Martin. Does that, with that framing, do you think there's another step that the task force should take today?
I think if we don't come out very quickly, and it doesn't have to be today, but in the very near future, with a recommendation of a level of performance, either silver or gold or whatever that might be, and with steps in place of piloting this coming year and how it's going to fit into the model, then there's going to be bills dropped, and there's a lot of weight that's going to be put behind it that is going to bypass everything that we've done.
Hey, this is Nikki Minotti again. would there be, I agree with what Dr. Martin has said, because I've heard those words come from Lieutenant Governor Hosemann. I do want more information. It's hard to make a decision when we don't have the information, but would there be a possibility of, let's say we set it at silver, and I'm guessing right now, but you get a certain amount, a percentage of a point for silver, or another percentage for gold, or something like that, kind of like we do AP courses?
That's yeah, certainly a model we can explore. Absolutely.
I really am just concerned because I've heard from both task forces, and I do think we need to make a decision, but it's really hard to be put in this position at this point without information. Plus, we're trying to have school, and every time everybody has a lot of other things on them, but I do think we need to make a decision.
One of the things that I would like for this committee to do as we're making these decisions, when we glossed through it this time, but we've all looked at that mission statement. We're doing what's best for kids. We're talking about a subgroup that we are putting out into the workforce, not the group that's going to college. This is the subgroup that negatively dings schools across the board in the other categories. This is an opportunity for them to give not only positive on the accountability model, but getting them employable out in the workforce. So I think we should look at what the workforce considers acceptable, and that needs to be our goal.
And this is Eddie Pazan. I agree with what Mrs. Brewer just shared, because I was just going to say, as we look at the ACT college and career standards, it seems that those have been determined by what a student needs to be successful in college or college related careers, whereas the work keys is determined, and I think business and industry would have to be involved with that determination, which I'm sure they already have in place, or that because they use it for those purposes. But for them to for us, I think that we use the career and technical based readiness more so than the college standard. So I think that has to be considered when you look at the work keys, instead of just comparing it directly to ACT.
Hey, this is Robin again. Those group people that are in your in count for that chart, what are they representative of? What kind of school districts are they from? Are they A's? Are they B's? How many are A's? How many are B's? How many are C's? And et cetera. That's one thing I would like to know. And then I have worked closely with our Chamber of Commerce with industry around in our area, and silver is the standard that they look for hiring.
Right. So I take your point about the representativeness of that group that's come up a few times, and I think that's persuasive. That's something we'll definitely go back and look at and report back. I'm just looking at and I'm hearing your comments. I'm taking some notes here, and I see Nathan's put a comment in here about funding to reimburse districts for administration of the work keys. I guess is that something that is made its way through the legislature, Nathan, or is that something that's proposed?
Yeah, Chris, that was in our appropriations bill again this year. It's laid out in section 41 of the appropriations bill. We took a methodology to the board last fall, and districts were able to make claims for reimbursement of work keys, AP, dual credit, IB. The methodology the board approved, though, puts priority focus on administration of work keys assessments, particularly for CTE concentrators, CTE completers. So that funding is available again through that appropriation, and those grants will be available for reimbursement again this fiscal year.
Thanks for that information, Nathan. Are you saying that so the way you read it, that they would only reimburse CTE, or would they reimburse CTE or other students as well?
No, I'll grab the methodology from the board meeting from last year and drop it in, because you put the primary focus on your CTE completers, and then you can administer it to other students at the district's discretion for those students that want to take it.
So I'm still thinking about the comment that was made about doing a weighting with work keys. So for example, let's say a student makes a silver on work keys and they get a 0.5 in college and career readiness, and then if they get a gold on work keys, they get a 1. And I'm not saying that this is an example. So I'm trying to think of some counter arguments. So if we did that, then would you say a student who makes an equivalent score on the ACT gets a 0.5 point, and if they meet the ACT benchmark, they get a full point in college career readiness? And then, and I just say that because I think the fear is about creating a situation where students are given work keys not because the student needs work keys, but because schools and districts want accountability points.
I would say one thing with that, the way the ACT currently is calculated, well, it's English or reading, 0.5, and then if you get math, well, then, 0.5 plus 0.5, so 1. So English, 18 in English, a way higher percentage of students meet that than they do the 22 in reading or the 22 in math. So the truth is more students get the 0.5 than they do the 1 already. So to me, it makes some sense, to be honest with you, because basically what you're saying is the same thing if we're looking at comparable. Okay, so they met it enough to get the English credit, but they didn't meet it enough to get the math. I know that's not exactly the same thing because work keys is measuring different things in the ACT, as we've said, but that would make some sense to me, as far as the calculations go.
Yeah, and I had asked ACT about why the standard for English was lower than reading and math, and their response was the ACT is a predictive measure of student success in college. And most students with a score of 18 in English on the ACT do fine, for lack of a better term, in English comp in college. That students tend to be more prepared for English comp, and so it's not necessarily a lower. It's a lower rigor. It's a lower measure of performance for English, but again, the purpose is to predict student outcomes in college. So it's based on, I guess, observations of student performance in English comp when they get in college.
Yeah, so here's what's all on the table. There's a lot right now. We have a number of comments about the data, questions about data representativeness, and that these are all fair, noted. We'll work on that. I think I've heard from the committee, I'm not sure, that it's still your desire to think of this as a pilot year, that affirming any decisions like today or in the very near term is not the desire of the task force. But I'm also trying to measure that against Dr. Martin's very good cautions, and that many people affirmed, which is that decision makers are looking for as much clarity from the task force as possible if we want to have an opportunity to be influential in the decisions that are made. And I think where that positions us right now is, we have a working framework for how this would be included from previous meetings. We have a timetable and a process from previous meetings. So the question is that sufficient enough? Now, there's a few new ideas that are thrown into this, which, things like, do we want to give partial credit? this might even inspire us to go back and think about whether or not this is best captured through another component of the accountability system, but I don't want to unravel stuff that took us a long time to build. Yeah, I guess my question for the group is, how much more do you want to press on this today? It's my job as your kind of facilitator to make sure you feel like your voice is heard and your intent is reflected here.
Chris, I might give you a segue to the next topic with this, but here's something I'm thinking about. So this year being a pilot year, I mean, truth be told, when we use the term decoupling assessment from accountability, are we even reporting college and career readiness? See, that's in my mind as well. Are we reporting that out? Are we going to report points, calculate the points and report the points as we would when we say pilot year, or if we say it's not a pilot year? So it's, I think that kind of matters too, as to the rush, if you make sense, is this going to determine points and that kind of thing, or is this just, let's look at what's best for students and go forward, but that's how we're going to do with every component of the accountability system this year. So I know that may be a segue into what we're about to start doing, but see, it's hard to make that decision till how it all fits together, for me personally.
I couldn't agree more. I think that's that's the elephant in the room as we're talking about all this, is we're pretending like this conversation's happening in a vacuum, and we know it's not. We know there's a lot of moving parts.
I don't know if I'm, this is Lance. If I understood you correctly, it was never my intent that during the pilot year, personally, that we would count those points for anything. I would want to do, I would think we would do it truly as I think Ryan was referring to as, just a pilot year, like most normal pilot year. But I will say this, like Tim said, I am worried that we're going to have something handed to us and it's not going to matter what we think. So I don't know if that pushes you to do something today, but it definitely, I think, would push you to do something before the timeliness of these meetings that we've typically been having, maybe after gathering some information that some of the people on the committee have asked about.
And I don't want my comments to scare us into thinking I don't think we have to have a finished product, a final decision made today, but we have to have a plan going forward of what's going, what are our, it can't be, well, we're just going to be looking at more data. There are people behind the scenes that don't understand the process that we go through and are frustrated at how long it takes. And so they're going to just make decisions. We have to have a plan going forward of, okay, we're going to pilot it next year. I think, a definite decision. We're going to pilot, we're going to do this. This is what it's going to look like. I think that needs to come out of today's meeting.
So Dr. Martin, in your opinion, you feel that we need to set the mark based on your conversation with Lieutenant Governor, and that's the only piece that we're missing? Is that what you're saying?
I think his conversation with me this morning before he began to tour was they are very interested in a level of what we're going to set the level at to and what it's going to equal and how it's going to fit into the model. Yes.
Yeah, it's just to remind folks, here's what we do have, because I think we may have more than folks immediately remembered. We have a recommendation for how it's going to go in the model. We have a timetable and a set of conditions so that, we're going to have a pilot year. We want to make sure that there's equity in terms of accessing work keys before it's included. I think the committee's been all very clear on that. The only thing we don't have is a performance threshold. And I think the committee has wisely said we should use the pilot year analysis to look at not just comparability to ACT, but also to just impact throughout the accountability model. And that's been the tradition of this group. And I think smartly to say that you don't want to make consequential decisions until you have your eyes open in terms of what the impact is. Now, I get, even as I say that this year could be very, very atypical when it comes to accountability. But we're we have no more visibility now than we're going to have later. So, waiting until we've got more recent data does seem like a prudent call. But again, that's all to say that the thing that lacks is the impact analysis overall for the model and a particular recommendation for the threshold that's going to be required. So, yeah, and I think what I would take from this meeting is, I obviously I don't want to make any promises with how I talk to the department team. I think we can certainly meet again in a month or so. We'll bring back the data on the representativeness, and we can even talk a little bit more about, challenging the model for inclusion, whether or not some partial credit approach. And again, even as I say that, I know there's substantial limitations, but we can, we can make that the focus of our next meeting to see if you want to tinker with a little bit of the framework that we've developed heretofore. But yeah, unless the bottom line is the thing we lack now is a final decision about a threshold, and unless the committee wants to act on that now, it seems like we're in a good position to just wait on that.
Alan, let me ask you if you know this, because you in your opening statement, you said that you felt like we would have to establish new school improvement designations off of 2021 data as of now. I know you have no waiver, so you think we got to run the whole thing technically as of now, but I know there's options being discussed with the decoupling. So if that's the case, are you saying college and career readiness, whatever the component, how it is made up, would be run for this year's senior class for 2021 school improvement designations?
Well, not necessarily. So it's kind of hard to figure out what data we can use for school designations, and where the U.S. Department of Education is going to go on this. We're still waiting for advice from them. But what I kind of want to get across to schools and districts is, in planning, is that you should assume that to some extent state assessments may inform school improvement designations this school year, and or just go ahead and assume that they're going to at this point. We don't know to the extent that they will or how they will, but the concern is that if we're continuing to make school improvement designations based on 18-19 data, that those designations are going to get outdated. And we've got to make sure that we are directing resources appropriately to where they're needed. And we've got to come up with a way to identify those areas of need as best we can. And if we have state assessment data, we will likely use that state assessment data to redirect those resources. Now, that being said, to what extent we can include other accountability measures, I don't know the answer to that.
Okay, so I think I get you. You're basically saying you're hoping that there's some sort of compromise, for lack of a better term, to where we use some of the data that's new, probably more state assessment data, but maybe we don't run every single component to, quote, update the designations that were previously established.
Yeah, I think that's a fair statement. Dr. Oakley or Chris, do you have anything you want to add? I know they've been involved in these conversations.
No, everything's so speculative right now that it's hard to even kind of go on record. But I think the way you guys are thinking is similar to the way I'm thinking, which is, if pressed to be clear about what some modification or what some alternative would be that deals with the very real problem that Alan gave voice to, which is just suspending accountability another year has its own issues. And wanting direct supports in the right place with the best information seems like a noble goal. So if flexibility is given, then doing something like suspending the A through F grades, but looking at entry and exit criteria for CSI and TSI based on some modified set of indicators is an example of sort of a compromise position or a modified position that might help accomplish multiple needs. But again, all that is so speculative, colleagues, that I hope you don't kind of put me on record as saying that, because we just don't know right now from ED what flexibility is going to be allowed. But we're just trying to think through what paths might be attractive.
I think the two of you have summed it up well.
That helps. I was just trying to see how this conversation fit into that. You know what I'm saying? Because it's kind of, I don't want to say the cart before the horse, but in the same time, like, you know, how does that, what do we got to do today based on what Lieutenant Governor and legislation want to do? Also with what's accountability going to look like, what's going to be reported? Because people don't, want to add a test, you know, right now with the virtual, and, you know, you want to only test the kids that this absolutely helps. And, you know, so there's just a lot of moving parts here.
Yeah, that's my concern with this is, you know, like I said before, whenever we add policy or make policy, we want to try to think through any unforeseen consequences, negative consequences of making policy. And, you know, I would hate to see a situation where students are given yet another test that is not to their benefit.
So colleagues, I'm going to check in again to see if we're okay pausing here. I think we're at the point where we scheduled a break. Again, the things I took from this conversation is we're going to come back to you as soon as possible with more data on representativeness for the analyses that we just presented. And our working plan right now is still to go into a pilot year with all these huge question marks about what this year is going to look like in order to make final decisions about the threshold that will be applied. It's my understanding, based on previous meetings, we already have a quote model for inclusion, and you know, I'm happy to open that back up again, and we'll certainly give voice to that at subsequent meetings. But that's where we are, I think, in terms of our place on this issue.
I know that we're getting ready to take a break, but I just want to put this out there. You know, when we look at the ACT scores, we go according to what ACT has said will allow success at the college level, correct?
Yes, those college readiness benchmarks from ACT are the current threshold.
Okay, well, ACT says that the National Center Readiness Certificate is earned by achieving a level score of 3 or better on all 3 work key assessments. So if they're saying that our students will be successful in the workplace with a 3, why do we need to, you know, collect more data? And I mean, it's there. It's already been given to us. Why don't we just go ahead and accept that and move forward and figure out how it's going to play into our accountability model?
Yeah, that's certainly a perspective. I mean, if the committee wants to take this up now, then I'm not gonna, it's certainly not my place to be a barrier to that.
Chris, I think this maybe gets at whether the expectation on the work keys is that students meet that requirement, and that makes a claim comparable to the ACT college readiness score. I think from what we heard this morning, you know, certainly there may be a different expectation for those students that are pursuing a CTE program or CTE workplace placement after high school. There may be a different need for them to be quote unquote career ready. And so, Elaine, I appreciate the perspective, and I think there's some value in considering that. We consider that actually in the diploma endorsement options that we've talked about before, where the sub-score performance or the work keys expectations are different for those different endorsements. But I think it gets at how you include it in the model, and are you making a claim that you can use this score in lieu of the ACT score?
This is Lance. I know I've been pushing over the last couple of meetings to get this to a point where it was definitely a really strong conversation. I don't really feel comfortable right this second with all the stuff that's been talked about saying, I don't know if I could formulate a recommendation right now with everything that's been talked about. I don't know, maybe if we can get that information and get back, like I said, I think Dr. Martin, like he said, I think sooner rather than later, but maybe it's just me and maybe I'm not grasping exactly what's being said, but.
No, I don't think it's just you. I think you're grasping it well. I think there's some heavy stuff on the table, and I think it's reasonable to say that having some more information and time to process it is not is prudent. So yeah, and I think the question I think is just lingering over us is this going to be based on policy, or is this going to be based on a desire to be comparable? And it's always been comparability before now. I'm hearing some voices that say there's just a policy threshold that the committee ought to make, in which case, there are some known consequences to that, and I think that's something that we ought to just be honest about. And again, it all interacts with this larger question about what's the model going to look like this year. So colleagues, I'll go ahead and suggest we pause here for a break. It's 10:12 by my watch. Why don't we come back at just a few minutes before 10:30? So we'll take about a 15-minute break. So that'll get us right at 10:28, 10:27, 10:28, and we'll continue. Thank you. Well, welcome back. Hope that folks were able to have a good break, and we've got about an hour left to do some accountability planning. I will say, Dr. Martin, others, I did see the conversation in the chat, and my suggestion is let's definitely make it a priority to return to these questions when we have our next meeting, which I do hope will be fairly soon. And it sounds like we really need to spend some time talking about the relationship between policy and data and making this decision. So I definitely hear the voices of and read them of folks saying that there's a rationale for adopting a policy position here. Let's go to the next slide if we can, and I'd love to get as much feedback as we can in the remaining time on this next topic. I just wanted to start a little bit with just stepping back and doing some big brainstorming and reflections about what accountability could look like. We said several times in several ways in the first hour of our meeting, first hour and change, that we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what flexibility is going to be permitted from the feds. There's a lot of moving parts here. But in some of our brainstorming about it, I found sort of this rubric to be somewhat helpful for us to think about what kinds of approach is going to be attractive moving forward. And I think there's two dimensions that matter, particularly for this committee and the kinds of recommendations that we might make. One has to do with design. And when I say design, I mean, what does the system look like? What indicators are included? What are the weights? What are the performance thresholds? So that's all those things that all those kind of technical decisions that we have a tradition of spending a lot of time talking about and exploring in some depth. And the other dimension is the use. So regardless of what design decisions are made, what are the consequences going to be? And that can be anything from public reporting to supports, other kinds of outcomes, the kind of the actions that are triggered by virtue of receiving accountability designation. And you can see there's probably a continuum, even though I've shown this in a 2x2, there's probably a continuum that you could imagine along those dimensions. So you might find yourself in the top right corner of this and say, hey, we want to keep the design as similar as possible. We want the uses and consequences to be as similar as possible. That's one point of view. You could be in the bottom left cell where you say, hey, I want both the uses and the design to be as dissimilar from the current year as possible. So let's only just report information, maybe not even all information. Let's suspend consequences and classifications, maybe tweak the supports. And there's all sort of variations of that. So no decision's been made, but I wanted to start with this to say, these are the kinds of things we're brainstorming through, and your advice, even at this early stage, will help us to refine our thinking. So let's go to the next slide, and I'm just going to pack this a little bit more before we walk through the indicators. So yeah, I mentioned that there's several components when I talk about design and use, and design can mean everything from which indicators are being included, how are they included, what's so-called good enough performance, both for the indicators and for the overall categories. The use covers things from whether or not grades are produced. I mentioned earlier that there's this point of view that you can have maybe some grades or some ESSA categories, but not all. Maybe just revisit the entry-exit for schools most in need of support, which is currently defined as CSI. Modify supports and consequences. So there's a lot of different ways in which the system could be modified, as we talked about, sort of some kind of transitional process or some sort of modified model. And that's what's on the table. And again, we're not asking for folks to make a decision about that. We don't think we can make a decision about this. Too many unknowns. We just don't know the state of some of these data, and we don't know what federal policy is going to permit. But we've got to be smart and try to get out ahead of that as much as possible, which takes us to the point for today, which is we need your advice to help us interrogate each of these indicators and help us look for the kinds of things that we need to be paying attention to as we make these design and use decisions. And so these are the accountability indicators. I bet it's not unfamiliar to anybody on this call, so I won't linger there. But I'm going to just take them one by one, and I'd love to get your feedback. This is mostly, again, a listening item for me that I could take notes and hear the kinds of comments and concerns that folks may have on that. So let's go to the next slide. So we start with assessments, proficiency. Currently, as Mr. Burrow mentioned from the start of the meeting, the plans are to move forward with assessments in 2021. We know that performance may be impacted by uneven opportunity to learn for students in Mississippi and all across the country. When scores are missing. So again, what I'm trying to do here is as I mention each indicator, I'm trying to put on the table the things that I know are challenges. So one challenge is uneven opportunity to learn. Another challenge is going to be missing data. What do we mean? Like banked mathematics. So if we were planning to draw a score from 2020, spring of 2020, that doesn't exist, that puts a hole in the system. And we know that in those kinds of circumstances, that results in 21 wouldn't be comparable to those in 2019, the last time the model was stood up. There's also this uncertainty about U.S. history due to the timing of standard setting. So we don't know if standard setting is going to be able to move forward for that and what that's going to mean about the availability of U.S. history results. So those are some concerns we know about when it comes to state assessment results, and there may be others that we haven't thought through fully, and we want your advice on that. And maybe I don't know if it makes sense for me to just kind of go through each one and then open it up, or I'm happy to pause after each indicator and hear your feedback.
Hey, Chris, this is Ryan. So with proficiency, I mean, it's the closest one, I would guess you could say, to where you can maybe have some, quote, accurate data. But you're right, U.S. history, you've got to go backwards. To be honest with you, because of the banking situation with science, you're still dealing with giving them an either-or option with science proficiency. So truth be told, at your 1,000 scale level and your district scale level, you're already down to only math and ELA as even a possibility to be able to calculate quote new data. But yes, the whole impact of the loss of the 6 months, and you're trying to catch up the math skills and all these things. My opinion with your first slide you showed, I like that similar chart. I don't know anybody on this call that's not going to be in the dissimilar box, which is the bottom left. Like I personally, you want as little reported as possible. You want to suspend classifications and consequences, and you want to look at your data and have a year to start recapping standards, moving forward with the grade level standards, and then move on and try to get back to some sort of normalcy. I'd be surprised if there's anybody on this call that's not in the dissimilar box, but maybe I'll be surprised.
No, that's helpful, Ryan. I really appreciate both those points.
And hey, this is Nikki Minotti. I agree with Ryan 100%. We've given pre-test through TE21 and we've given STAR, and our kids are struggling. And I don't believe that we could keep up with the growth or the proficiency that we've been seeing. And I was just wondering if we could, are we still talking about making this like a baseline year where we reset the baseline cuts, or is that what you're kind of discussing?
Yeah, we just don't know what's possible. I don't even know if we'll have enough to do a baseline this year. But that's one point of view. One point of view is that the information will have enough integrity that it could serve as a baseline moving forward. But we've only one indicator in, and we know that we're going to have some holes in the assessment data. So that leads to the question, like, well, what would that even mean in terms of looking at a baseline for future years? So I think the disruptions are going to be substantial.
And whenever we think about K1 and K2 schools and how they receive their proficiency data,
Yep.
We are going to be looking at students who have left the school 3 or 4 years prior, which is not going to be accurate or fair.
That's a really important point. It's come up in some of our internal conversations, and I'm just going to add that to the notes because it deserves mention in this format.
I also don't think that we're able, Chris, to be honest, looking at the schools, we're having to send entire groups of people home a lot of the time, plus deal with hurricanes and different things. School is so not normal right now that I do believe that is the biggest factor that we're talking about.
And if I may add, this is Ms. Davis, Sunflower County. We still have children who have had no access to a teacher this year because of the technology deficit. They're still doing learning packets and have not seen the face of a teacher as of yet.
Yeah, and another thing to add to your data situation with proficiency, which you think would be the easiest measure. Just to be honest with you, how in the world are we going to get 4th through 8th grade students to test at a high clip unless things drastically change in April? And I'm sure the Mississippi Department of Ed is talking about that. But when you're 100% virtual districts or your high virtual districts, it's super hard to get those tests to be conducted and get students even at the school. So when you want to talk about missing data, just even setting the baseline for next year, that's just going to be quite a challenge, especially with 4th through 8th, because they have nothing on the line, so to speak, to make them do it with promotion or graduation. So I know you're thinking about that, but that's another thing just for, say, proficiency. But yes, they're absolutely right with the quarantines in and out. We're actually having to teach. This year, you're making the decision. We talked about it for a long time, but safety versus academics. And so people are choosing safety, obviously. And so it's counter to academics, and you choose that on a daily basis. So that's why I go to the as little as we can report and as little as we can matter is certainly, I think, what I'm in favor of.
Right. I think that's just about the only fair way to do it this year.
And to piggyback on what Ryan said, even if we had enough data, if we're able to test everybody, and if we use this year as a baseline for growth for next year, we know that growth is going to be grossly inflated next year. Just as it was, the year we went from part to what we do now, growth was tremendously inflated, and then it comes back down. So it's going to be a 2 or 3 year process to get us back to normal.
Let me ask this: has there been any discussion about the 3rd grade reading gate?
Does anybody from the department want to address that? The question is about the 3rd grade reading gate in 2021.
Just preliminary discussion at this point in time, but there's been no decision to waive that or pull back on that legal requirement at this point.
One other thing to add to that conversation right before that the 3rd grade reading gate is, I definitely think that it's very difficult when you have a student and a parent who are afraid for the safety and well-being of the child, to tell them if they were not to pass one of the subject area tests, they're not going to graduate. I don't see where that's going to be. I don't see where that's going to hold water whatsoever at all. Because like was said earlier, a lot of school districts, or some school districts, haven't even really been necessarily, they're not in person at all and don't have internet access. So I really think that is a huge issue, because especially when you put it in the perspective, if it was your child and someone in your home was ill, all those scenarios. I think that's a real tough conversation there.
Hey, Nikki, in your meetings with the Lieutenant Governor, either this year or person or virtual, have y'all discussed releasing any of the state testing requirements in regards to 3rd grade gate or subject area from their viewpoint?
Yes, we have discussed it since it is legislation. I believe that he may bring that up, I can send another email or text and see where we are on that. I do believe it's because the session was ended, but he did say that it could be brought up in January, in the January session.
Hey, this is Robin again. It would be very helpful if they at least would lower that performance level again back to the original cut. That would be a bit of a help.
Nathan, can you all hear me?
I can hear you. I can hear you.
This is Latoya Minor. Dr. Oakland.
Yes.
Has there been any conversation about what to do for those schools that are in school improvement? Like, I mean, the data, tracking those kids, trying to determine if they're showing growth, and identifying those schools. I know they have been identified, but trying to track the data on those students when we're having all these other issues.
Can you give me a little more specifics about what you're asking about, Latoya? Or this may be even an offline conversation. I know our MTSS office has rolled out several sessions for schools to join on data use and monitoring and interventions for those students. I know Chris's team, we're actually working with the National Center to get a series of webinars released with kind of a packaging from the department on best assessment practices. But
yes, it may need to be an offline conversation, because I just got off another call and we're trying to determine what data are we going to use to track those students. And we have some students that are home. We have parents doing the assignments for the kids, doing the iReady diagnostics, taking the in-case assessment. So we're trying to see, you know, what data are we going to use, and we've really come up with nothing, absolutely nothing. But it still has to be done. It has to present that information to the board.
Gotcha. I'll follow up with Latoya.
Okay.
You know, when I heard the term decoupling assessment from accountability, number one, and I want to thank Mississippi Department of Ed for having this conversation with us. I know you could have this internally, and you've been having it internally, so thank you for bringing it up as a point on the agenda. But when I heard the term decoupling assessment from accountability, what I hoped that meant was to do what we know to do as educators and not worry about points and not worry about rules and not worry about, well, only 5th grade growth and there's no 4th grade growth and all these things, and simply, okay, what previous standards are missing for the student? What are we going to do about that while teaching grade level standards? And be able to do that without that pressure of points and A and B and rankings and so on, and you know, honestly, ATSI and that kind of thing too. So that's really what I hoped that we would get to, and with that, maybe even districts. You know, we're all doing these plans for the digital learning plans. I mean, maybe we incorporate what our plans are with that. How, you know, how are you going to use the devices and the technology going forward? And we just do what we need to do for students for this year, and that's what we focus on. And whether that's words and not even data, you know, that kind of thing. That's just what I hoped. I hope that's what the conversation becomes.
Hey,
Ryan,
this is Richard. I want to chime in also. My district's under state takeover, and this is something to consider. In order for this district to get out of state takeover, we have to be a C or better for 5 consecutive years, or if the state board deems it appropriate to release us from state takeover. But of course, with the accountability issues from last year, that's going to be an issue. That's just something for the department may need to look at. You know, talk to the legislature about that or whatever. And the other thing is, from all my calculations last year, we were projected to not be an F. We're at least projected to be a D plus, maybe a C minus. So whatever decision is made, you know, not only for this district, but for all the other F school districts that are trying their best, you know, the fear is that they're going to be held back even more for years to come if we have to reset the cuts or whatever. And we got to do whatever's best for the state. But it's just some things to consider for all this decision making we have to do. Thank you.
Richard, Ryan, and others. I mean, all great points. I'm taking notes as fast as I can type. But I will. I will just offer, and I think this builds a little bit on what Richard just said. And even though, you know, what the point you made, Ryan, was so well made and so persuasive, it just stands, you know, it has its own sort of inherent credibility. And even while I agree with that, you know, we want to keep the main thing. We want students to be safe and supported, and we want professionals to be treated like professionals. Some of the reasons why we have to think through this very methodologically and very carefully are state and federal laws, you know, what we're allowed to do and what we aren't allowed to do, the desire to research impact. You know, as we have this conversation today, here we are in early October. The pandemic has been going on since mid-March of last spring. I think everybody agrees with a desire to really have some kind of measurable, again, divorce for a second, this idea of how it's going to be used, but having some kind of measurable to understand what the impact is. We're all saying we think it's uneven. We think it might be exacerbating achievement gaps. We have all these real concerns about what this means, and I think people are rightly wondering how can we best understand with more clarity the impact. And then finally, and this is really where I'm building on what Richard said, how does the state go about directing support in a world where capacity is always limited appropriately? And I think if the default answer is, well, we're just going to freeze in time designations that were made a long time ago and continue to regard that as the truth, I think a lot of people are going to challenge that. So that's why I say that even coming up with some modified way to say, what do we know about where best to direct support and to help schools and students with more recent information compared to what we thought we knew the last time we put together any kind of profile of school performance seems like a sensible way to direct our mental energies. So I think all that can live happily with the things that you brought up, Ryan, which is, you know, how do you do those kinds of things, but still not have accountability feel like a hammer? And that's, yeah, that's sort of the challenge before us. That's why this is a really, really thorny discussion.
One point one thing we did with our gap data, you know, like measuring growth didn't help us. There was not going to be growth, especially on the math side. Whether I measured it from 18-19 and you excluded all the other grades because of the 2 years and the 3 years and used the 7th grade for high school and you did all these things, it just wasn't apples to apples in any way whatsoever. So it didn't help us. So what we ended up doing was, from our last benchmark assessment, we did a regressed, sustained, progressed percentage. I'm sure other districts did the same thing. I haven't created this. People thought about this, but like, because the goal was, well, how many stayed the same? You know, and then how many went backwards? And so we looked at that across different growth levels, across different grade levels, across different subjects, and so on. You know, it's things like that. We're all doing this anyway. I've talked to other districts and they did similar things. So we're all doing that. So those kind of conversations, and then using those, like you said, to find that compromise with the U.S. Department of Ed, where, you know, they said they're open to discussions about how you use the assessment data. So, you know, those kind of conversations, that's the kind of thing I would like to discuss as we go forward as accountability task force. Like, so what do we look at when it comes to that? The thing about breaking it up into subgroups, you got to be careful, just to be honest with you, because you may not have enough subgroups represented in your actual assessment data. That's going to be a real challenge this year, especially in your 4 through 8 grades. So that's something to think about, how that looks. I think we need to look at subgroup data and we need to break that down. And obviously that's super important in all the ESSA plans. But how is that going to be represented? You know, if students opt out on the test. So that's the thing about it. But just overall, where were they and where are they now? And is that similar? You know, that's really all we're after here, I think.
That's well said. And I think a lot of people are also asking what the role of inputs is this year. So accountability has always been very heavy on outputs. But that's another factor that I think is going to emerge the more we talk about this. Why don't we, so wow, already just a great flow of good information and reactions. Let's continue on just so we can continue to collect your good feedback on these indicators. Can we go to the next slide? So yeah, growth is built on assessment data. So all of our concerns about assessment are ported over when you're talking about growth. As I mentioned, currently plans are to move forward with assessment. Yep, we absolutely understand some of the challenge with that, and circumstances could change. It's been something that's been talked about in technical advisory committee meetings and another forum. So it'll continue to monitor circumstances as we frame this. We know that if growth moves forward, some kind of calculation change, such as a skip year methodology, is going to be a way through it. That's what every state that I know of is looking at to recover growth. And I think it's a sensible way to continue to look. But everything that you've said about, hey, but that's the meaning and interpretation is going to change. That's that third bullet. We don't assume comparability to legacy growth. So it's going to invite questions such as, do you revisit the performance thresholds? Do you try to hold that as something that you interpret differences as being reflective of school performance? Those are important questions about growth. I'll stop here to see if anybody wants to say anything else about assessment/growth before we move on to the next indicator.
Okay, not to dominate, but if I'm going to have a lot of thoughts on this topic.
I'm glad you are. Yeah, go for it.
I thought a lot about it. So the other thing that concerns me, if you have traditional accountability and all these things, so people start discussing, well, resetting cuts, and does anybody need to be worried about cuts this year and that kind of thing? Mississippi's moved forward. NAEP showed we moved forward. We've also moved forward on the accountability scale, to match that. And so we don't want to go backwards to, 10% A's and all this when we move forward. So that's the other thing about, quote, having to have full accountability. That's very concerning, because I know Mississippi Department of Ed's main concern, Dr. Wright said it in the board meeting, is we've come too far to go backwards. Well, if we have full accountability, it may look like we went backwards. And so whether we did or not, just simply because you're putting things on a scale. So that's my whole thing with, so many of the changes, because, you're ruling out how many, basically, to be honest with you, 5th through 8th grade students are making your whole accountability system. That's just the way it's going to work this year. And so, is that the right thing to do? I go back to let's look at alternative methods like regress, sustain, progressed, things like that. Look at it by different grade levels and look at it. You can break that down further past other levels maybe than just traditional growth. And if you can get into subgroups and have that represented, that's a better way to go probably.
It's well said, Ryan. Thank you. Yeah, I don't think you're dominating at all. I think anybody that has any input along the way, this is the purpose of this item. Is there anybody else that wants to offer a perspective about growth in particular? Okay, let's move on. And so my graduation rate. So this indicator is lagged, meaning that in a world where we would imagine accountability comes back in 2021, and we've already put a huge question mark behind that. But what we'd be seeing in 21 is the graduation rate that was computed based on the 1920 year. So that causes us to think about, well, how do we interpret that? In 2020, the department relaxed some graduation requirements. For example, students who earned credit in a course with an in-course test weren't required to take and pass that corresponding EOC. So, all of this is speculative, right? Could we have seen a spike in the graduation rate? Were the circumstances of school disruption substantial that the graduation rate was depressed? I think the point is that this is the last thing. Comparability is uncertain. There's so many conditions that are swarming around whatever the graduation was last year that that interpretation and meaning is something that we have to revisit for this. But yeah, the reason we put this before you and we put these issues before you is just to hear, what else should we be thinking about when we think about whether and how graduation rate could be reported or could be used as any kind of meaningful indicator moving forward.
I'm trying to give everyone else a chance to speak. I would say with graduation rate, again, it comes back to that same decision. Are we having full accountability? Well, then we need to use last year's graduation rate, even though it's going to be higher. I mean, the points are going to.
Do you think it will? Do you think that's?
Yes.
That's been your observation in your district?
Yeah, I think it's going to be statewide. I think it's going to be across the country.
No. Okay.
I agree.
And so, yeah, I mean, it's if you're going to use it in accountability, but yes, is the data comparable? No, I mean, it's totally different situations. And what we're going into this year's a totally different situation, totally unknown. We have no idea if the tests are going to, factor in or not. So, again, if we can get away, if the USD can allow us to, have these discussions and this is our plan, this is what we want to look at, and they're going to okay that, and we don't have to have full accountability, then graduation rate is just something you report, but we don't put all this weight on it because of the scale. So.
Okay. Thanks, Ryan. Any other comments about graduation rate in particular? So we've got concerns about comparability. We've got an expectation that there's likely to be a spike based on what was observed in 2020, presumably influenced by relaxing some of those requirements. And again, I hear you loud and clear, folks expressing very high skepticism about moving forward with any kind of status quo accountability.
And this is Richard. It's not only that, but also the students that had the graduation options waived from last year. So we could be dealing with this issue for years to come, of course, because you have 8th graders that have been excused from the Algebra 1 testing requirement, 9th graders and 10th, 11th, and 12th graders also. So there's that variable to think about as well.
Okay. Thanks, Richard. So why don't we go on to the next slide? I think we just have a few more. So the acceleration component, we want to hear your feedback here. We know this one draws information based on participation and performance and AP, IB, AICE, dual enrollment, industry certification. And so, my hypothesis is that impact of course taking and certainly assessment. When I say assessment, I mean things like taking AP tests and IB tests and industry certification exams is uncertain, and we need some more information. And this is one where I'd be very eager to learn from the task force. What's been your observation? What's the state of the state when it comes to these components that go into acceleration in a world where students are attending remotely and hybrid models and things like that? So help us understand the impact, colleagues.
I think if you have virtual students that it has impacted in that, can you provide the full suite of AP courses, at least in our case? So, for our students that are coming on campus, most of them are still able to take those AP courses, all of the selection that we have, but not necessarily for all of our virtual students. Our dual enrollment has been affected in that. Really, our community colleges are teaching, at least in our case, teaching the dual enrollment courses, as in the past, we had our own staff. So that has impacted us as well.
That's helpful. Thank you, Charlotte. What are some other perspectives about what you're seeing with these acceleration components?
Hi, this is Vicki Finlay. I think that it's affected just like the other testing, the secondary tests are, because ADs had to change up their testing procedures, IBs had to change up their testing procedures, dual enrollment. The kids, some are online, some are not. It's all been affected in, with the same current situation. And, some kids are in and out quarantine, and are they getting what they need? We don't know. We're trying, but we don't know when they have to go in and out for virtual. So, it's affected just like everything else is across the board.
Thank you. I appreciate that feedback.
Yeah, your schedules, if you're doing a mix, like virtual and traditional like we are, your schedules are spread so thin because this limited, you still have the same allotment of teachers and so on, and you're trying to run two schools, two districts at the same time with one set of personnel. And so because of that, you don't have the numbers in dual credit. You don't have the numbers in AP. And how is AP going to do the test in the spring? They hadn't said, is it going to look like last year we had the home option and not? And so if the students don't take the test, then they can't get the credit anyway. So yes, it's certainly going to be affected. And I would say as opposite of graduation rate, it's certainly going to be down.
Yeah, I agree totally.
I kind of expected to hear that. It's important that we do. It's important that we get your insights from what you're experiencing. Let's move on to the next one. We can always go backwards if anybody decides to chime in. So we talked about college readiness before. Let's return to it now in this context. So let's take work keys out of it because that's still a work in progress, but it's based on ACT. And my understanding is that there's a partial administration in spring 20 and then supplemental administration this fall. I think the ACT is department and everybody's working to provide other opportunities to submit scores. So yeah, I think the two issues that we know of here are making sure that everybody has an opportunity to take the test. It sounds like efforts are underway for that, but then we go back to opportunity to learn and whether the disruptions are likely to impact performance. But let me pause here and please tell me what your experiences and advice are with respect to college readiness, given that it is right now influenced by ACT.
You will have more data for this one than any other component. But you spoke to it, Chris, the opportunity to learn is the big problem here. And so the data, will be different because of that, just the ACT prep classes and, the sessions that occur and then, in the last 6 months. But yeah, there will be more data present for this one. There will be full data. But will it be lower? Most likely, yes.
Thanks, Ryan. Other perspectives on ACT? Do people agree that students are having an opportunity to test and that it looks like that's going to be one of the more complete sets of data, even as we don't for a moment move away from the huge issue about what the impact on performance is, but any other perspectives about ACT? Okay, let's move on. I think it's EL Progress is our last one. Yeah, English Language Progress. I think this is another one. This one's complicated even when circumstances aren't as uncertain as they are now. Our assumptions is that the English Language Progress Assessment is going to proceed this spring with a new test. The department's got a new contractor that's going to be in place for the ELP test this spring. We know that partial testing occurred in the spring of 2020. The challenges here are interruptions to opportunity to learn. That shows up, I think, in every conversation we're having. Changes to the assessment. So we're looking at moving from an old test to a new test and then missing data to the extent that you have some gaps in prior scores due to suspension of testing or disruption of testing in the spring of 2020. So if that indicator moves forward in 21, and this is one, again, I think it's some of the higher concerns in a world where there's already a lot of high concerns. We know that things like business rules, including, what are the exit targets, are going to have to be reviewed and modified. But again, let me just open the floor, and I'd love to hear your perspectives about the things we ought to be paying attention to when it comes to English language progress in the accountability model.
Hey, this is Nikki Minotti again.
Yes, Nikki. Mm-hmm.
This one this one's been an issue for us in the Bay because the opportunity to learn definitely has not been there for those students. They went home and they've been home for 6 months speaking their native language, and they were not getting any instruction in English except what we could do on Google Classroom, you know, those types of things, if they were able to access that. And what we're finding is even the students that had tested out are testing back into when we gave the WIDA, when they entered school again, the students are moving back into the EL category. So I think that opportunity to learn is going to hugely affect this group.
Yeah, this is Charlotte. I agree with you, Nikki, on that. And it's almost like we need to start all over again with this group because we've got so much missing data, and then, like you said, the opportunity to learn, and we're gonna have a change in assessment. So I don't know how we're gonna connect all the dots with this one.
I agree with both of you, and like most of us, even those of us that are one-to-one and are providing virtual to students in that manner, this population and most of our most at-risk population are the ones that are the higher percentage of our virtual students. In our district, we have about 34% that are full virtual. And I would say out of that 34%, it is highly populated with our at-risk students and our EL students.
That's exactly right, Tim. And those are the ones who don't necessarily have the structure at home to be successful virtual.
Yeah, I absolutely concur with everything. And Dr. Martin, we're seeing the same data here. As far as the data on the component, I came up with the only 4 options I could see, and basically you'd have to put in the 18, 19 points exactly, or the NA, or no EL for anyone, period, or we follow the rules, which means only a 1/4 of students tested so they're going to have it because it's basically a baseline growth, component. So that's that one, and or you follow the rules, but you do like we would have to do with MAP, and you exclude last year and you go back to 18, 19 to set the baseline. So if you're talking a data standpoint, that's really, I think, the 4 options you would have to look at. But all the information that's been presented is absolutely a fact by everyone.
Right, and the change in the test is just, it takes an already complex situation and just really elevates it. Let's go to the...
Chris, one more point on EL, something, so thinking back to what I've been suggesting to do with, math and ELA data, maybe we do something similar. We look at the percentages that exited and the percentages that didn't, and there's no ramifications for that. Just districts are going to look at it anyway. You look at those kind of things, and you as a district have a plan as to what you do if you need to submit the plan, the MD or whatever. But you look at that, you look at your EL. We're given the EL test, like you said, do assessment. So how does the scale work compared to the last scale? Another issue. But if it is comparable somehow, then you look at just simply, who scored 4 and who didn't. And okay, so what do we need to adjust because of that? But you don't, there's no ramifications. It doesn't equal to, 668, and it doesn't ramification, equal to A. So.
Yeah, I definitely hear you, Ryan. You've been consistent in your guidance here, and I think it's very thoughtful. Let's go to the next slide, which I think is going to get us close to wrapping up here. So, yeah, I mean, let me just pause in a moment to do just another catch-all here. For any other thoughts, concerns, cautions that the task force would want to provide to us as we try to untangle just a real a large number of complex issues here. And again, we're not trying to solve them now. We're not trying to build a new model in the few minutes we have left in the meeting. What we're trying to do is just make sure that if there are important things we should be thinking about, let's get them on the table so we can make sure we include those in our conversations internally and moving forward with this task force. And I also heard to this last bullet, I heard Ryan say, and I heard others agree, that the task force is most drawn towards an approach where it's as the design decisions are dissimilar from the legacy or the status quo model, and the consequences are also as relaxed as they can be. So I think that's on the continuum. I'm hearing people say that they think these challenges place us in that kind of classification. Yeah, but I see some things in the chat. Thanks. People have agreed with a lot of what their colleagues have said. Ryan, you've given voice to a lot of people's perspectives, so that's appreciated.
Okay, I'm going to say my final thoughts, and then I'm going to stop.
As much as you like.
At the minimum, we should do away with the letter grades for this year, because if I'm not mistaken, that's not part of ESSA. That's a state law. So we could probably deal with that with Mississippi ourselves. That's a minimum. But again, you can't say, well, you're 668, but we're not going to call it A, B, or C, because people know how that works. So you kind of, it's apples and oranges. You've got to you got to do away with the whole system at some level as far as running it all. If you're going to do that, but to me, that would be the minimum approach, and then the maximum approach is and somewhere on this continuum. So where does USD allow us? And I totally understand you guys can only do what ESSA, what the USD is going to allow you to do, and you can only do what state legislators are going to do when it's a state law. So that is not solely up to you, and I completely understand that. And so I appreciate you having these conversations with those folks, but and representing us. But the the conversation with the legislators about the letter grades, that's one end, and then the other end is yes, we're going to look at data. We're going to look at where the students were, where they are now, and then even let's present talk about plans as to what we're going to do about that. And so what does that mean? We measure you got to look at where they were before and where they were after. The only thing I am going to bring up with the asterisk is you're still not going to get all your data. I don't know how you test everybody. You're going to have people that will opt out, and I don't know how you force them to test. So that's the big caveat in all this, even having data to do anything with this year or next year. But with that said, we present that plan to the USDE. Do we look at any growth? I don't know. I mean, you're knocking out so many groups by doing that. But if we do, it's just something we look at and we present plans about what we're going to do about, but it doesn't calculate the points. That would be my take and my final words.
Again, thank you, Ryan. Yep, I've taken many notes from your comments and others. Yes, somebody else is trying to get in. Mm-hmm.
I was going to say, Ryan, I don't believe those would be your final words, but that's okay. We appreciate your input.
We hope they won't. We're glad to have yours and everybody else's input. Let me pause again before I take us to the place where we start to wrap up. So the last thing on the agenda is just our open call for suggestion for what we should be thinking about in future meetings. And I already have some things down, and let me just say those back, and then I'll open it up and folks should tell me if they have other things they want to add. Sounds like we've got some more discussion to be had on work keys. We've got some great advice about some additional analyses, and frankly, we have some folks saying that they want to take this conversation up from a place that's not empirically based, that it's more from a policy perspective. And so I think we need to come back to that. And so I've heard you and I read your comments in the chat, and I want to respect that. When it comes to accountability, which is the big elephant in the room, as I've said a few times, We're going to continue to keep our ear to the ground and listen to guidance from the feds. There's a lot of stuff going on with some national organizations, some of which I'm involved in, that's going to illuminate some options here. So we'll continue to bring you the best feedback and the best current advice and perspectives we have on this issue. But I think ultimately it's going to take us to a place where we're going to have to start developing some plan B's, C's, D's. We're going to have to look at some alternatives, such as, again, I hate to even put some on the table because I don't want people to make more of it than they should, but, could there be some kind of modified or streamlined set of criteria that are used to influence support in 2021? What would that look like? On what indicators? Based on what rules? Would we even need new naming conventions to keep people from making assumptions about comparability that we don't want them to make? So these are all the kinds of things I think that we're going to have to talk about. I can just assure you from my conversations internally with department that all the caveats that many of you have given voice to are well understood. And I think that folks are really eager for as much information as possible to help. I think about it like solving a complicated math equation. There's just so many variables we have to define before we can even start to see what some potential solutions are. But with that, that's sort of my forecast for where we're going. We'll revisit work keys. We'll come back to the accountability and what will accountability look like, and probably give you some models to kick the tires of in future meetings. But what else should we be thinking about for future discussions, colleagues?
Hey, this is Richard. I just have an idea. I don't know how feasible this idea would be, but it would be nice to know what other states are publicly saying that they're doing. And I know that ultimately we all can look it up in Google ourselves. But since we're all kind of busy dealing with so many things in the district, I mean, it'll be nice if maybe somebody from the State Department or you could maybe throw an article every now and then, not to persuade us one way or another, but just to educate us as to what is the national conversation, where are we all going, so that it maybe can help us out as well to make some informed decisions. And like I said, we can do that ourselves, but y'all would know where to get more focused information that's publicly available. And I think at this level, with all this uncertainty, the more we find out from what other states are doing, I would say that's a win-win. Thank you.
Yeah, fair point. I can. This is going to be hard to hear, but I've got some insight into a lot of states are doing. Everybody is in the same place Mississippi is. I truly don't know a single state that says we know what we're doing this year with accountability. Every state saying we're eager to hear what the feds are saying about what kinds of flexibilities we're going to have. Now, I know some states that have taken different policy positions. So I know that I can think of at least one state that says we're really trying to recover our status quo accountability system, and we're trying to do as many modifications as we have to do to stand that system up in 21. I know states that are more like what it sounds like the perspectives on this call are, that are saying we have the highest level of skepticism that there can be any kind of version of accountability. This year, it's going to be more like reporting, and even that's going to be done very carefully, and all in between. But honestly, and this is not a dodge, I don't know any states that feel very clear about what their situation is this year. Your question's well timed though, because Alan and I are both involved in a group that meets the week after next, that brings together over 40 state accountability directors, and Alan is among the leaders at that group, and we'll talk then. That's one of the items on the agenda, is to hear from states about where they are and learn from that. So it's a well-timed request. Richard, we can definitely bring back any insights we learn from what we know about other states. Anything else, colleagues, in the few minutes we have remaining?
I said it in chat, and I'm so glad to hear that we will work on this going forward as an ATF. I know you guys can't share every inside conversation with us, but I am so glad to hear that we will work on this going forward. And you're right, we need to, exactly, like you said, the Model A, the Model B, I love all that. Like, so what does decoupling assessment from accountability exactly mean? And how are we going to do that with the data that we do get to satisfy USD and legislators? So that's really what, like you said, the elephant in the room, that's what we want to work on. That's what we need to do going forward. So I'm so glad we get to participate in that. So thank y'all.
Great. Well, thanks everybody for being partners in really tough conversations, but important conversations. So, and to be continued for sure. Anybody from the department have any parting words before we officially adjourn?
Chris, just appreciate the conversation from everybody this morning. Again, the department's focused, as each of you are, on improving outcomes for kids, regardless of where they are, if they're virtual, remote, pencil, paper, whatever that looks like. We want to make sure that you're serving them as the best you can, and trying to ensure they're making progress going forward. So, thank you.
Great. And with that, I hope everybody. Oh, go ahead.
This is Paula. I'm sorry. I've had to keep my camera off because I don't have good service. But I just echo what Nathan says, and then just emphasize again how much we appreciate every member of the task force, and you and Christy, for all the time that y'all are working to help us work through this difficult time. Just appreciate you all.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Vanderford, Dr. Oakley, everybody. Until next time, enjoy the rest of your Tuesday, and be assured we'll be in touch.
Thank you. Have a good day, everyone. Bye.